Yes, sir. We're good.
All right. So as we're going through this, I got a quick agenda for you guys here. First, we're going to go over some booms. We're going to talk about what's going on here. We're going to talk about what your risks are, especially for local government. There's some specialized risks that are coming into play. Talk about some of the challenges that have to do with cybersecurity. And then we're going to go through some of the best practices for cybersecurity, both left of boom and right of boom, which means before an incident and after an incident. And then I want to take a minute and specifically go through and talk about what is some specific things and challenges that come into play with CGIS and public safety and some of the risks that are involved there. Jeremy, I'm on slide 2. Are you seeing slide 2, or are you still stuck on slide 1?
I'm still seeing slide 1.
Okay, hang on one second here.
Sure.
Let me see if I can get this back. I'm sorry, fellas. You'd think I'd understand how this system works by now. All right, are we seeing slide 2 now?
Yep. See the agenda,
right.
Boom, what's at risk, left of boom, right of boom.
All right, finally got this thing figured out. All right. So first off, these stories in here that you're about to hear and see, these are actual real stories that have come up. These are some recent things that we've seen that have popped on the radar. Of course, we monitor all the breach pipelines and news and everything else that's out there, but we also have some insight with some of our partners in the U.S. and this is some of the stuff that's come up. And the first one that I wanted to bring up is actually relatively recent, and there was a breach in the DC police happened in April. And what made this one a little bit different is the bad guys, they decided that they didn't want to just come in, lock up some files, say, hey, pay us some money, we'll give you the key back, you can have your files back, just like we've seen before. They decided they wanted to throw a little bit of a kink in, and they said, hey, we're going to send you an email. Not only have we hacked into your system and encrypted all your files, but we've also downloaded your entire database that has all your personal records for your police officers and all of your information for your informants that are out in the field across the city. And you guys either need to pay us $50 million or we're going to release all these records to all the bad guys. I'm going to let that settle in here for just a second. $50 million, or we're going to cut loose all of the files that you guys had in your database. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I would want to be in that position when that email came across. I don't know of any cities that can just say, okay, you can have $50 million. But the opposite of that is what happens if you find one of your informants in a body bag because you couldn't pay them and the information got out to the public. Another one that we recently had that came up was the Dade City, Florida. And when the Dade City, Florida one came out, they actually had an issue where a group called Avedon actually did the same thing that they did with the police department up in DC, and they said, hey, we have all of this information. If you guys don't pay us, you have 120 hours or we're going to leak all of this information out. And so what we're seeing now is there's a switch over from, hey, we're just going to lock your files up and we're going to have you pay us some money, to now, okay, now we're going to be throwing in some ransoms in here along with some extortions to try and get you guys to pay us an even larger amount of money. When we first saw this coming out, it started with, hey, pay us $2,500, pay us $10,000. And then we see it jumps up to 300,000, 500,000, a million. Now they're throwing all this other leverage in here saying, hey, you got to pay us $50 million or we're cutting loose all this information. And so the threat out there is real. The threat is increasing, and this doesn't even include the cost on the back end of it. This is just on the front end to make sure that none of this information gets out. This doesn't take into account downtime, data loss, loss of productivity, and that can easily reach into tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so when we're going through this and we say, hey, this is a risk, this is very much a risk, and it doesn't matter what size of a city, it doesn't matter what size of a town, everybody is at risk. And it's not just the cities that are at risk, it's also the people that are servicing the cities. And so I know here at the Fulcrum Group, we have taken extra steps to make sure that we secure all of our data because we have access into city information systems. And so look through all the vendors that you have, make sure that they're just as safe as you guys are, because the last thing you want is your group is safe, but they get to you from one of your vendors that's working with you guys. One of the reasons why we've seen the increase is it's become very apparent these cyber criminals, they know that they really can't be touched. They're out in their own island, nobody can get to them. They really don't have any concern, which is making them they're getting a lot more brave. And as we see this now, we're actually seeing some additional systems that are coming up that are also at risk. There's been a couple of them in 2020. They actually took down some 911 call centers. And so now you're going from just the local government group to now you're going to an emergency service that is now being at risk. And when you start talking about that, now you're talking about, okay, there's life and death literally on the line and the system's completely down. And when you're talking about compromising that kind of data, it's time to sit back, take a look at it and go, okay, how can we prevent this? And so as you're going through all this and you're thinking about it, think about where is your risk at in the group. Looking through all the systems, police especially, they have more access to more sensitive data than anybody else. You start including body cam footage, facial recognition systems, all this stuff. They're collecting all this stuff, they're keeping all this stuff, and there's a good reason for them to have it. But if you're going to have it, how are you collecting it? How are you storing it? And how are you protecting it? Because what we're finding is the technology is outrunning some of the laws. And if you look into the laws, some of them are pretty vague on what are the requirements for long-term storage, retention, and keeping all this data safe. And in some cases, we're finding there's not really a precedent. There is no guidance at all on how we're supposed to be keeping this information safe. One of the things that we've seen recently as well is there's been an increase in cybersecurity issues out there because criminals are getting into the system, where back in the day, you'd have these pop-ups that come up, you would know what was going on, you're having all these issues, you can't get to your files. It was pretty apparent pretty immediately that there was an issue going on here and we needed to fix it. What we've seen here recently is the bad guys are getting in the system, but you don't know that they're there. So what happens is they sit around and they watch and they see what's going on, who has access to what information are they getting into, and they slowly start to siphon over time all of this data off the system, and you don't even know they're in there yet. And what happens is over time, they'll just sit here and they'll pull more and more and more information. And by the time you realize they're there, they've got everything. And so they don't care anymore. And then that's when they will go ahead and lock up all of the information that you have. And that's why ongoing monitoring of systems and analysis and watching the alerts is so important. In the second half of this, Arctic Wolf is going to come up with some of their solutions. They're going to talk a little bit more to it. But what we're seeing is it's becoming a really big deal. These guys are sitting in systems for days, weeks, months before people even know that they're there. And it's actually gotten so bad now, the Department of Homeland Security is calling it a threat to national security. There is some talk. It looks like there might be some help coming down the pipeline over the next year or two. They're talking about subsidizing some funding for some cities and towns, especially on the smaller side that can't really afford some of this stuff. So what they're hoping to do with some of this additional funding is increase spending on their cybersecurity to hopefully boost your cybersecurity posture. We don't know where that's going yet, but what we do know is the boom isn't going away anytime soon. It's here to stay. It's going to get worse. And if we don't ramp up our efforts on one side, they're going to get ahead of us. And that's the one thing we don't want. So let's talk about what's at risk. There's a lot of ways that you can go with this. For local agencies, there's a lot of different facets to this. There's more than what I've got here. I just wanted to hit on a few of them here so we can go through it. But if you guys have any questions and you want to talk about it, dig into something, let us know. We're happy to take this offline and dig into what it may look for your specific organization. But here, what we wanted to talk about is first off, starting with your data and your applications, because there's a risk right now as the sorry, there's a risk right now that the bad guys, they can go wherever they want to, they can do whatever they want, and most local law enforcement, national law enforcement, FBI, once you get to a certain point, there's not a lot that they can do. There are some countries that are trying to kind of tighten the screws on these guys, but what's happening is they just move to a different town, start up a new operation, and they just continue as they were going before. So they know they can get away with whatever they want. And right now, the latest numbers are the average breach, not counting the actual ransom itself, but the average cost of a breach from the notification fees, legal fees, recoveries, cyber forensic investigations, those easily are exceeding $100,000 on a case-by-case basis currently. And again, that doesn't include the upfront cost of the ransom that they're going to be asking you guys for. So when we start looking at systems, we start looking at applications. By far, by a large margin, public safety has the most data. When you start talking about the body cam footage, you start talking about long-term retention, they have the most data. Bad part is it's also the most sensitive data. They're not the only ones. You have courts, utilities, all those revenue sources, they're out there as well. And when those systems go down, now you're talking about an impact on revenue because you can't collect utility information, you can't do all of your permitting, you can't do all this stuff. So now you have an impact to your revenue flow as a city. And so we also want to make sure that we're watching over that stuff as well, because that needs to be protected. It's not as sensitive as the body cam footage and some of the information over on the public safety side, but it's just as important to a city to make sure that that stuff is also protected. One thing we have seen lately is there's been a large uptick in the amount of write-offs that people have. So you've got public services delivering, say, water to houses. Well, if something happens on the back end, you can't bill for it. You have no way of showing what the usage was because you couldn't do your reporting. Now you're talking about a complete loss of revenue while you're trying to get your systems up. And if your systems are down for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, how much revenue are you going to be losing during that time because you have no way of doing billing? You don't know what their usages are. You don't know what the numbers are. And the other side of this, when you look at it, is what is your reputation going to be? You're a public servant. You're out there. You're trying to do your job. All of a sudden, your systems go down. Well, now you've got a breach. Now you might have to pay this money. Now you've got litigation. Your citizens are looking at you going, what are you guys doing? What are we doing here? Why didn't we know this was coming? We've seen all these attacks. They've been in the news for years. You guys weren't doing anything to prevent this. What are we doing here? And now you've got an issue where you might have council members that are at risk. You might have police sergeants, police chief. Now their job's at risk. You got everybody's looking at the city manager going, hey, what are we going to do? Mayor's out there trying to make sure that everything's okay. But everybody's going to be looking at you going, why didn't we take care of this before? And you start to lose that confidence that the public has in your ability to actually maintain a little bit of unity within the local government. And that actually can be more devastating than anything, because now you're talking about people are going to start losing their jobs. And that's a big deal, especially in this day and age. We want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so when you're a city manager, police chief, internal IT guy, that's one thing to think about. If something happens, my head's going to be on a chopping block. Am I doing everything I can to protect myself from that situation? Now, one thing we'll say here, we've got the Colonial Pipeline up on here. Utilities, there is a risk that you can't bill. The bigger risk is what happens if you have a pump station or a lift station or something that goes offline. Now you can't actually deliver services to your people. One thing with the Colonial Pipeline that came up is it was down for, I believe, a week and a half. But what if it would have happened 3 months earlier? This pipeline delivers fuel to the Northeast. Most of that fuel is used to heat homes. If it was 3 months earlier in the dead of winter, the system goes down. Now you can't deliver what you need to so people can heat their homes. We saw that here in the Dallas area back in February when the snow hit. What happens if you can't deliver the critical utilities? It then becomes a matter of life and death. So when you're thinking about this, it's actually couple-sided here. There's a private impact on your organization, your placement of job, but there's also the public impact of what happens if I can't actually deliver services to my people. And then one thing to look at is what is that cost going to be when I actually try and recover it? There's a fiscal cost that's associated. Again, upwards of $100,000 or more. But how long is it going to take the people to come back around and start trusting that you guys know what you're doing and you can do your job? Sometimes it could be years, sometimes never. So as you're thinking through this, think about that's a lot of impact to think of. Cybersecurity challenges. So there are some challenges that come with cybersecurity. When thinking through some of these challenges here with local governments, a little bit different than if it was a private organization or even a publicly traded company. So when you're thinking through some of this stuff, the first thing I want to make sure of is internal IT is not going to be a cybersecurity expert. Looking at your internal guys as cybersecurity experts is not fair to them or to you. A typical local government, you're looking at 50 to 60 city employees for one internal IT guy. So you're asking that internal IT guy to fix passwords, fix printers, go through your network, understand what your architecture is, work on your servers, work with your vendors, your AT&T for internet, and you got your phone servers, and you've got all these people that they're talking to just to make sure your services stay up. And then you're asking them, hey, you got to go through. We got to do budget. We're in June. You guys probably either just finished budget or about to finish budget. Now they stop doing what they're doing. They got to work on their budget. Make sure that you know what your budget is for fiscal 2022. What's my IT spend going to look like? What's the long-term roadmap? And I haven't even gotten into the cybersecurity side of it yet. And so day to day, their plate's already full. And then to turn around and ask them to then, okay, manage my cybersecurity, it's not fair to them. And then you say, well, we're outsourced. We have an MSP that handles all that stuff. And yes, an MSP, they're going to be better equipped to handle some basic cybersecurity because there's just more people in that group. You're not dependent on one or two guys. But most of the time, your MSP is going to be delivering things that we would call basic cybersecurity stuff. It's nothing that's going to specifically approach where you guys need to be when it comes to your cybersecurity. We're going to be doing basic stuff like patching, antivirus management, very basic stuff like that. When you start to look beyond that, that's not going to be included in your contract. That's going to be something that you need to sit down and talk to them about, hey, if I wanted to get this, what does this look like? Because most MSPs, it's not included in your contract. So there are some solutions that can be delivered. We'll talk about that here in a minute, but just know that they're not really going to be included with that basic one. Employees are still your weakest link. So yes, there is a term in the business that I really like to use. I call it wetware. And that is the person that's sitting in the seat. They're the person that is logging into the computer. They're the ones that are going to be your biggest threat. It doesn't matter. You could have the latest and greatest firewalls. You could have all this stuff in place. But if somebody in the accounting department or utilities department clicks on that bad link, you just bypass all that stuff that you put in. It's very, very important that we understand not only how we can affect the employees and make them more effective when it comes to cybersecurity, but sit down and understand where is all of the risk coming from. There's state of Texas just released a requirement for end user security awareness training, and it's supposed to be an annual thing that comes out. Everybody has to fill it out. There's lots of ways you can do this. There's actually a page you can go to. They actually give you links to acceptable services that offer that. But what we're finding is even with that in place, people say, yeah, I have it, but they're not enforcing it. And so what happens is they have all this stuff in place. They don't train their end users. Something happens. They panic. They decide, okay, we're going to do this. It lasts for about 6 months. And then the oversight just kind of starts to fade and they fall back into where they were before. And so one thing to remember is it doesn't matter what you have on the hardware side. If your people aren't trained, there's still going to be a giant hole. That's a giant risk for you. So make sure you stay the course, keep them accountable, make sure they're doing their training. One thing that we've heard a lot here, especially lately, is cybersecurity is a responsibility of my IT group or the responsibility of my MSP, my technology partner. One thing I want to be sure of is be very careful when you're going through that mindset. That can be a very dangerous mindset. The reason for that, cybersecurity requires everybody to be involved. If IT is doing all this stuff, they're putting these policies in place, they're updating all the credentials, they're doing all this stuff, but local government, the city manager, assistant city manager, police chief, well, I don't want to be involved with that. You guys just handle it. That's very dangerous. The only way that this stuff ever succeeds is if everybody jumps on and they're all rowing the same direction. That means as a city manager, as the mayor, as the police chief, you're sitting down with them going, hey, where are we at with cybersecurity? How much have we done? Have we put these policies in place? Have we done this? Have we done that? Understand where you guys are, understand how far that you've come, and then also how far do you have left to go? Because at the end of the day, city employees are going to listen to a city manager that sits down and goes, hey guys, we haven't done this. We've got to do this. I've asked them to send me a report every week. If you're not doing it, I'm going to call you out and I'm going to hold you accountable. Cybersecurity success starts at the top. So if your mindset is, hey, my IT guys do my cybersecurity, it's time to start thinking about a different way to approach it. Now, another big challenge we're seeing right now is the world of IoT, the Internet of Things. And normally what you would see is it was primarily in the SCADA area, but now we're seeing actually some other things that are coming up, and it's devices you wouldn't really think of. It's the cameras, the door readers, the thermostats, it's the council meetings. You're broadcasting out to Facebook or you're doing simulcast out during meetings. It's all that audio visual stuff. That stuff needs to be accounted for when you're going through this stuff. If you have all these things in place, and just to run a scenario by you guys, if you have everything in place, your guy comes out and he says, hey, we're going to put your broadcast software in so you guys can stream all your council meetings out to Facebook. He installs the device, hooks it into your back office network. Now all of a sudden, hey, great, now we can stream. But what he didn't tell you is the device he's using that's connected to your network doesn't have proper security, doesn't have the proper protocols in place. He doesn't have any antivirus on there. He's got 14 different things that he didn't even know was on that machine. Now you have a really giant hole in the middle of your network that you didn't even know was there. So as you guys are going through and you're looking at all this stuff, understand, what are you putting into my network? Where are you putting it into my network? Can we take it and move it to a safer network that doesn't touch everything else? Can we make sure that it's locked down properly? If it has to be on my network, let me get with my IT guys, let me get with my MSP. Let's put all of our items on there, the antivirus and the monitoring and the patching software, to make sure that this machine is as safe as it can be. There was actually an incident a little while back. One of the new casinos out in Vegas, they got breached in one of the weirdest ways. And it turns out that one of the bad guys came in, they logged into the monitor of the fish tank in the lobby, and they were able to pivot and get into the network from the fish tank. And so That's very much a thing, and it can very much happen to anybody. And I mean, this was a Las Vegas casino that spends millions of dollars on their IT. And so if it can happen to them, it can happen to you too. And last but not least, there's an issue I've seen out there for a very long time. We worked with a lot of our partners on this one. It's a lack of policy and procedures. When you get into a situation where you've got to have a response, that is not the time to figure out what your policy and procedure is to respond to a situation. Just like every city, you have to have a policy for active shooter. You don't want to be in the situation of an active shooter going, oh, hey, what's our policy on this? It's the same with cybersecurity. It's the same with IT. If you don't have these policies and procedures in place, you need to get them in place. If you have them in place and you have to take the book out and blow the dust off the book, it's time to update your policies and procedures. And then once those policies and procedures are updated, make sure they're being followed. The amount of times I've talked to people, yeah, we have this policy, we have this procedure. Okay, well, what does it say about this? Oh, I don't know. So they spend all their time doing all these policies and procedures. They have no idea what's in there. They're not following them. So if you're going to put the effort in, make sure your people are following them. So go through this real quick. So we have left to boom and the way that this is designed. So when we talk about boom, it's a military term that they use, and left to boom is preventing an attack. A boom is an actual incident. In the military world, an incident, this was brought up when they were talking about insurgent cells planting bombs on the side of the road and all this stuff. So their boom is actually a boom. We have taken and we have moved this in the IT field to reflect the boom being what is an IT incident, breach, loss of data, something like that. So you have a left of boom, which is preventing the attack. You have the actual event that's going to happen. And then you have right of boom, which we'll talk about here in a minute, which is what do I do after the event has initially happened? So the good news is there are agencies out there and they are coming out with a lot of things that you guys can do to sit down and understand, okay, what are best practices? What have you guys come up with? What do we need to do first so that we can start to prevent these attacks from happening? I'm going to warn you, it's not cheap. Cybersecurity is not, it's not something you can just do, put on the shelf, say, okay, I'm done. It's one of those that once you start down the road of cybersecurity, that road keeps going. And so you need to go back and you need to do it. It's not just a one-time expense. It's going to be something that you guys need to build that into your budget and account for what does my cybersecurity spend look like every year. And it requires a lot of work. Not going to lie, it's not easy. It's not cheap. It requires a lot of work. First thing you need to do, start with a risk assessment. It's really hard to understand where are the holes, what do I need to do, what's my first step if you don't understand where you are. You open up Google, you go to pull up an address and you say, I need directions to this address. Google's going to tell you, great, where are you? It can't tell you how to get there unless it knows where you are. So start with that mindset when you're looking at your cybersecurity as your organization and say, okay, where are we? The best way to understand where you are is to start with a risk assessment. Understand what are my most critical assets? What does my budget look like? And what does my time frame look like? If you have those three pieces of information, you can at least take that first step to understand, okay, where do I need to go from here? Most cities, if you have a budget for cybersecurity currently, it's probably not a huge budget. And so you need to understand where's the most effective place I can spend my money to make the biggest and best impact on my cybersecurity status right now. Once you do that, your next step, going back to policies, build out those policies, understand, okay, what do my policies say currently? Do I even have a policy? Is there somewhere that I can pull some information from so I can start to build out these policies? If you have questions, feel free to reach out. Jeremy, myself, anybody at Fulcrum, we have people that can help you. They are certified in cybersecurity policy writing. They can sit down with you and they can go through this to make sure you're not wasting time, effort, and resources building out the wrong policies. And again, when you're looking at your policies, don't forget, you got to go back and you got to review them. Find out, okay, how long has it been since we did our policy? Has it been more than 10 months, 12 months? I usually advise people once a year, sit down and go through them. Your stuff changes. You might have a system that was on site that's now in the cloud. You might be doing something different for your storage. You might be doing something with your utility billing that's not the same. All of this is going to change your policies. And by the way, don't forget your incident response plan. When something happens, you need to have that plan in place. If something happens and you don't have it, it's already too late. You need to have that plan in place before something happens. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's go on to basics. This is very toe in the shallow end of the water. We're not jumping into the deep end here. This is very beginner stuff in terms of cybersecurity. In football, this would be, your blocking, tackling. In baseball, this would be catching and throwing. Very basic stuff here, but we're going to walk through it, okay? One thing you're going to see on here, a lot of this stuff has reporting in it. And the reason we say that is because as a city manager, as a police chief, all of this stuff, you should be asking these questions on a regular basis with either your IT team internally or your outsourced partner. Where's my patching? What does it look like? What is my status? Where are my holes in my network? And don't just settle for, hey, you know what? We're good. Okay, great. That's not where you want to stop. You want to say, okay, show me, where are we at with this? Understand where it is. Get involved with your cybersecurity so that you understand. Understanding it so that you can actually go back and say, okay, we need to put more time, more resources, more effort into this field over here. So first off, Windows patching, it's pretty basic thing here, but the important thing is with Windows patching, there are securities and vulnerabilities that are coming out constantly within Windows. If you don't have patching, you're going to have vulnerabilities that need to be filled within your network. Make sure that everything is patched. And again, make sure that you're getting that reporting showing that all of my workstations, laptops, whatever they are, tablets, everything is patched and updated. The other thing is going to be your antivirus. Antivirus can be very, very finicky sometimes. So make sure that you're updated. Again, getting that report. Where am I at? Is my antivirus up to date, installed on everything? Am I making sure that I've got everything up to snuff with where it is? There's an interesting change going on right now. What we're seeing is there's a move from antivirus over to a little bit of a different kind of AI learning. And so what we're seeing now is it's going from, hey, my antivirus is using signatures over to I'm using AI, I'm using the cloud and all this to learn as I'm going. So it's doing more of a proactive report as opposed to reacting to stuff before it comes in. And so depending on where you guys are with that, I would advise Fulcrum Group, we're doing the same thing. Look to those next gen antiviruses. With the backing of AI, they're going to start becoming more effective than your traditional antivirus, which is going off of security policies. I'm sorry, signature policies. Now, the next one, end user security awareness training, should probably be number one because that is your biggest weakness right now. But make sure with this, include regular phishing simulations. Most training programs that are out there, they have the option to include phishing simulations. And the reason is you want to make sure, yeah, my people are going through the slides, they're reading this, they passed the 10 question test, they didn't really have any issues with it. But when you start sending out these phishing emails, you're going to see, okay, who's actually falling for it? And the good thing about this is this will tell you before there's an issue who you need to spend a little more time with on the training side. And it doesn't cost you that much. So make sure you're doing that. Next gen firewalls, they can be really helpful. If your firewall's older than about 3 years, it's time to start looking for the next replacement. And the reason is the next gen firewalls, they are connected to the cloud and they also have a sandbox mode. And so what happens is if you have some bad stuff coming through your firewall, it can actually take that information, load it up into its cloud, unpackage it, and say, okay, is this good or is this bad? And if it's bad, it doesn't even let it through the firewall. And so that's a recent development. It's only a couple years old. So if you have firewalls that are older than about 3 years, it might be worth taking a look at it and seeing, okay, is this something we need to look at? Disk encryption, I won't hit this too long. You guys know this. Mobile devices, especially for police, if something happens, a laptop gets lost, can you prove, again, reporting, can you prove that it was encrypted at the time? Asset tracking, do you know where all your stuff is? Can you say, okay, I have all this, here's all my stuff. Yes, everything's accounted for. The one thing I want to hit on right here is multi-factor authentication. If you haven't done anything else, get multi-factor authentication. There's a big impact for multi-factor authentication. Yes, it can be a hindrance. People are, hey, I log in and then I got to log in again. What's going on here? But if the bad guys get a hold of your credentials in a breach, and it may not even be the city breach, because we all know that people, they use 1 or 2 passwords for everything. So if your credentials get breached, the first thing they're going to do is try Office 365, AWS, Gmail, Microsoft Azure. And if they have your information, they turn around and try Office 365, they're going to get in. So what multi-factor authentication does is it says, okay, hey, you have the credentials. I don't notice where you're coming from. You need to prove that you are you. And so it will send a notification out saying, hey, I've got a login from India, Pakistan, China, whatever. They say they're you. Is that you? If you hit no, you've just thwarted the entire plan that they had. And so multi-factor authentication can be a very, very good thing, and it doesn't cost a ton of money to implement. So once we get the best practices down, the basic stuff, next thing you want to do is you want to move into some of your advanced stuff in here. There are some things in here you're getting out of the area a little bit of what your MSP is going to be able to do. So when you start talking about managed detection and response and endpoint detection and response, that is something that our partners like Arctic Wolf, that is their specialization. And he's going to be coming on here in a minute. He can talk to you guys a little bit more about this. But it's not enough to make sure you got, hey, I'm logging all this stuff. No, you got to have somebody that's sitting there watching it, understanding your environment, understanding what's going on. So when something funny happens, they can understand, okay, this isn't right. We need to do something about this. MFA tokens. So when you guys are implementing MFA, so it's multi-factor authentication, some cities are different than others. If you don't pay for a city phone for your people to use, so your policemen, they come in, they have their own phone that they're using. That's what they use on a daily basis. Don't put multi-factor authentication on their phone. You don't want your cybersecurity dependent on somebody's phone that you don't legally have any way of controlling. In that situation, go out and get an MFA token. There's lots of different options out there. We can walk you through all your options if you want, but go get a token that operates independently from that person's personal cell phone. Again, don't let your cybersecurity be determined by somebody's phone that you don't have any control on. Penetration tests, vulnerability assessments. Again, you get a baseline assessment to begin with, but it doesn't stop there. We recommend annual penetration tests and vulnerability assessments. Now, not everybody can do it. Maybe you have to pick one. Maybe I do a vulnerability assessment, and then next year, maybe I do a penetration test. But make sure that you're doing at least one of these annually to make sure that you stay up to date on where you are in your risk posture. One thing I will say on this is if you are going to do this, do not have your internal team or your service partner do this for you. When somebody that we are a partner with, we do their IT, they come to us and say, hey, I want to get a vulnerability assessment done. I want to do a penetration test. If we manage that network, we will go get a partner and we will bring them in to do that test. Don't rely on your existing IT to tell you what the status is of your network. Make sure that you get it outsourced to another group. They will work with your IT. Your IT will still run the show, but the results are going to be independent from your internal IT. Ransomware protection, make sure you guys have that. Cybersecurity insurance is very big these days. So make sure as you're rolling through this, make sure you have the protections in place and make sure that you have filled out the information properly. When you're going through here, the only thing worse than not having insurance is thinking you do when you don't actually have it. And then you've got your offsite disaster recovery. Make sure that your backups are air gapped. So if they encrypt your network data, make sure that your backups are away from your regular network so that information doesn't get encrypted. Again, what's worse than not having backups is thinking you have them, something happens, you go back to your backups, and they're all encrypted, so you can't use them. So make sure you've got that protection in place. I think I'm running a little bit short on time here, so I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and run through this real quick here. So the boom, make sure you have your controls in place to stop the attacks. When something happens, make sure that your stuff is doing what it's supposed to do. And that's before this happens. So make sure your firewalls are up to date. Make sure you've got your intrusion prevention. Make sure your antivirus is in place. After something happens, the first thing, don't panic. Don't run around trying to figure out what to do. If you remember back, you guys have an incident response plan. This is when you pull it out. Make sure your incident response plan is being followed to a T. Everybody signed off on it. Everybody knows what's going on. Isolate your infected systems. What that means is don't unplug the Ethernet cable from them. Make sure you remove them logically from the network. What you don't want to do is you don't want to remove information that could be used by the next one, which is your cybersecurity response experts. They will come in, they will start looking for information, they will start trying to find out what's going on. Sometimes you pull the plug on those computers, that information is gone. You've now lost all those forensics. Once you've worked with them, now the process becomes, okay, how do you recover your data and systems? Don't try and recover everything all at once. Recover a piece, make sure it's working, make sure it's no longer infected, then go on to the next one. Next thing, notify the vendors, all the city employees, residents. One thing on this, make sure you have a policy on how to respond. Your incident response plan should include a piece in there that prevents your employees from getting on Facebook and blasting out, hey, they just shut down my computer because we had a giant cybersecurity incident happen. That's the worst thing that can happen in this. Make sure your incident response plan includes how do I keep people from blasting out information all over social media. And again, go back, review response, update your incident response plan, find out what did work, what didn't work, and then update your incident response plan accordingly. Jeremy, how am I doing on time?
You're a little bit over, but go for it.
Okay. So public safety, you guys are a little bit different. We need to talk about CJIS here for just a second here. CJIS, Criminal Justice Information Systems, they came out a little while back, and they have a set of controls specifically for public safety. One thing I want to say is these policies, these standards, these are not what you need to have. These are minimum requirements. And a lot of times when you're looking at these policies, this is a place to start. This is not a place to stop. So when you're going through here, look at everything that's going on. Again, you have third parties that are coming in, whether it's your radios, maybe it is your docking stations in your police cars, all kinds of stuff that's going in here. Make sure that anybody that has access into your system, not only do they have auditing enabled, so you can see exactly who went there, why they went there, when did they go there, and how long were they there, but also make sure that you have MFA enabled for all their systems as well. That's something that you can hold them accountable for. Hey, if you want access to this, you got to turn on MFA. Access control. This kind of goes for everybody, not just police, but I'm using it here as a specific example. Make sure that you only grant the minimum amount of access that you need to for people to get into your system. Not everybody needs to be an admin. Not everybody needs to have access to the domain. What is the minimum amount of access that I can give you so you can do your job? And then that's it. Don't give them any more. Basic things, password, screen lock policies. This is a big one as well. One thing I have seen, just to expand on this one a little bit, is what we've seen is a lot of people don't recognize, hey, I'm sitting at my computer. I have a password lock screen on there. It's great. But what they don't understand is they're sitting in front of a window and that window faces the street. So anybody driving down the street, they can see right into that window. They can see exactly what's going on. So it's not enough just to have that. If you're in that situation where you have those windows, it may be time to put up a screen so you can block it. I know it's sunlight. Everybody they want to feel that warmth. They want to feel invigorated, nice, bright office. But at the risk of failing a CGIS audit, make sure you have window blinds or some type of screen that you can put up to block that from happening. Network segmentation, make sure that you guys are segmented. Anytime we do anything for CGIS, because there is FIPS compliant, which you'll see down here at the bottom, we segregate the police network completely from the town hall network, utility network, fire network, and all that. They sit on an island to where there's limited access into it because that shrinks your CGIS compliant network. Your ability to secure a small network is much, much easier than your ability to secure a very large network. And then third-party contractors, Fulcrum Group, we are all background checked and we have all done our fingerprints. Make sure your third-party contractors, make sure you keep that updated. I believe it's annually. Make sure that that's staying compliant. FIPS, again, that's one of the specific requirements that's come out. We have found that there's quite a few vendors out there that they say, hey, I am FIPS certified, which means, hey, I've talked to the guys, but they are not FIPS compliant, which means you cannot use them in your network. Look at all your stuff, make sure everything that's within your police network meets that FIPS certification and compliance. And again, make sure you have that incident response plan in place. And I think that was about it for me. Do we have any questions that came up?
We did. This is actually what we're a little bit over, which I think shows our passion on how much information we want to share and best practices. But obviously at this time, we're about to go into break. If you wanted to talk about, James O'Brien was asking if there's any grants that help with annual pen testing. And Gary was talking about process-based detection. And then some are asking about the slides after. Daryl Austin had a question that I think we're going to save for Jim for at the end of his presentation. But basically, feel free to take your break now. Go ahead and have lunch. Keep this video on or keep listening as well. And then if you needed to jump up at this time, and we'll get started at about here in about 7 to 8 minutes. Jason, did you want to talk on grants for annual pen testing?
Yeah, so there is some things that are coming down the pipeline. The government, local government is not really doing a whole lot in that area, but the federal government has come up with a little bit of, I'm going to say talks. It moves at the speed of government, obviously. So I don't know the timeline on it, but they are in talks now of bringing up specific funding that has to do with cybersecurity. Part of that is going to be preventative. So it may be something that you need to start looking into because this would apply to pen testing, risk assessments, both internal and external pen testing, by the way, along with some of the training that needs to go along with it. So don't know the timeline on it yet, but there is some talks about that stuff coming down the pipeline.
Gotcha. And then Gary was sharing process-based detection. He didn't necessarily form it in a form of a question, but did you want to expand on process-based detection?
I would love to, but I think Jim is about to hit on
Jim?
that much more than I could. And so I would say instead of me answering it here, I would rather let him answer that question because they have that process in place specifically for that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let's take a quick 5 minutes. We'll be back on in about 5 minutes to introduce our second speaker, and then anyone that's able to stay on towards the end of that presentation or just after one, we'll wrap with some of these other questions.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Jason. Jim, we're going to take a quick 5 minutes and then we'll be back on.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, I had to jump off and then jump back on. Chrome did not want to allow me to share until I restarted it.
Appreciate that.
Yes, sir. And matter of fact, I'm going to try sharing so we can figure that out.
Definitely any process you wanted to do to get up and running. Okay, we can see your screen. Breach lessons learned.
Perfect.
Awesome. While we're on break, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you jumping on. We're very passionate about sharing this type of information and happy to have Arctic Wolf sharing as well. Also appreciate everyone jumping into chat and posting their questions, posting their expertise that they have on this subject matter. It's really the best way to get some of these ideas out to those that that might not even be aware of what to ask, but the ones that do have the awareness, getting those answers will help free up any kind of concerns. Also, hopefully you're able to have the lunch delivered to you guys and are able to snack on that now. Happy to provide, and anyone that wasn't able, feel free to use that after the fact. That's definitely your lunch for joining us today, and Feel free to use it for personal reasons if need. Hopefully everyone was able to use DoorDash. I've started calling some cities in Texas where I was curious if they even had it, but I'm sure that coupon can be used whenever you're visiting a larger city that has the service available. Anyone that has any other comments, questions, concerns, anything for Jason or for Jim, feel free to jump in chat as well. And so we're coming up on the start of the second presentation as well. So I'm going to let Jason jump in with any last comments, and also to introduce our second speaker.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeremy. Again, thanks everybody for being here. We're going to bring Jim in from Arctic Wolf here in just a second to do his presentation. Jim's been working in the cybersecurity market for the better part of 20 years now. He started his career at Blue Coat System in the early 2000s, so a grizzled veteran in this space. He's been working for companies like Blue Coat, F5 Networks, and Forescout, and is focused on securing the data of his customers and improving their security posture by offering solutions to end cyber risk. All right, Jim, without further ado, take it away, sir.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay?
We can.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So my mom's a flight attendant, or rather she was. She retired in February after flying for United Airlines for 55 years. Now, knowing that she was in her final trips, on her last trip to London, she wanted to get some souvenirs, and her last trip was over the New Year's holiday. And my mom's kind of old school, so she prefers to use cash, and she doesn't really like to pay the exchange rate. So when she lands in country, generally she goes to an ATM and pulls out cash, and her bank gives her a break on the fees. So when she landed at Heathrow, she went to her hotel, and right next door was a Royal Bank of Scotland ATM. She put in her card, typed in her PIN, and an error popped up. And it said, unfortunately, we're unable to process your transaction due to exchange services being down. She thought that was a little odd, and she, started kind of freaking out, right, without having access to funding. Right across the street, she saw a Lloyd's of London bank. So she walked over there, put in her card, put in her PIN, and the transaction went through. She was able to get her cash. Now, honestly, you didn't come here to listen to me talk about my mom's travels. However, she was almost victim to one of the larger cyber risks in 2019, 2020. So today we're going to go through 3 major breaches, and hopefully through this presentation, you'll see that cybersecurity probably has, if we're going to end cyber risk, we need to start looking at cybersecurity a different way. So let's dig into the breaches. So I'm sure you probably all heard about TravelX. They're the little kiosks in the international airports where you exchange your currency for a small fee to, yen or euros or what have you. The larger part of their business, and the part that almost hit my mom, was that large banks use TravelX to as a currency exchange service. So when a transaction happens overseas, like at HSBC or Royal Bank of Scotland, it goes through TravelX, and TravelX connects to the local banks or the domestic banks and tells them how much to debit based on the current exchange rates. Now, TravelX uses a VPN, and you all know what VPNs are. It's a way for people who are remote to access internal services. TravelX used Pulse Secure. Now, Pulse was spun off from Juniper, which was kind of the gold standard of VPNs, right? Very good platform. Unfortunately, the version that TravelX was using had a known vulnerability that allowed people to log in without using credentials. Like no username and password, zip, zero, nada, nothing. Bad guys knew this, and they went looking for customers with Pulse Secure VPN. A bad guy was able to log through their VPN, get access to their backend servers, and exfiltrate 5 gigs of data. Now, that included financial transactions and, more importantly, PII, or personal identification information. Now, that's pretty bad. In the EU, they are very, very sensitive to that. The fine, if PII information is extracted and the company cannot show that it was trying to protect it appropriately, is $22 million, or 4% of the company's annual revenue. Now, that's a pretty big financial burden, but they probably have cyber insurance maybe to cover that. The larger issue for Travelex is a loss of reputation, which leads to a loss of customers and a loss of revenue. Frankly, do you think HSBC and Royal Bank of Scotland is out shopping for a new exchange service? Billions of dollars were lost in this breach. Thousands of travelers were left without access to their funding. And the issue was, they had good tools for security. However, there was a known vulnerability that either somebody forgot to patch, didn't pay attention to the alert, or just plain said, I'll do it next week. So because somebody was able to get through this known vulnerability, Travelex had to file for bankruptcy. Now, that's a pretty bad financial issue, but let's go on to the next breach, which is the one that kind of hits me close to home. This one really bugs me. Let's talk about Zoom and how they were breached. Actually, before we do that, let's talk about the dark web. So the dark web is kind of this nebulous thing out there that everybody knows is bad, but not a lot of people know really what is contained in the dark web. I like to think of dark web as BGL, or bad guy land. It's a place for people to go to do nefarious things. You can find lists of good known username and passwords for credential stuffing. You can find lists of open proxies so you can hide your attack behind proxies. Or you can rent botnets in order to expand your attack and make it larger. The problem was Zoom wasn't paying attention to bad guy land. Now, we all know what Zoom is. Zoom's a way for people to connect, right? Either for business or like I did during the pandemic, I had family reunions kind of over Zoom. And it's a great way to connect. Unfortunately for Zoom, the bad guys went out to bad guy land, or the dark web, bought a list of known good username and passwords for their customers to do credential stuffing. Now, credential stuffing is a little bit more difficult to identify and contain than like brute forcing, where somebody just iterates through username and password, known easy passwords like admin or password or what's on my luggage, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Credential stuffing is where you take a list of known username and passwords and you iterate through them. So you're not like hitting one account every time. So it's a little bit more difficult to identify and contain. Well, through credential stuffing, and because the bad guys were going out to the dark web and getting these lists, they were able to log into Zoom and pull down recordings of Capital One and Citibank officials conducting meetings and getting financial transactions. And that led to a loss of reputation, a loss of customers, and a loss of revenue for Zoom. Matter of fact, I have some customers that say, Jim, I'd love to meet with you, but we're not going to do it over Zoom because it's an insecure platform. Now, that's a financial issue, but like I said, this one really bothers me. The other thing the bad guys were able to do is they were able to log into live school sessions. A lot of schools have taken to Zoom for their distance or remote learning during the pandemic. And Zoom's had a great run, right? They did very well during the pandemic. And like I said, unfortunately, they were focused on growth rather than paying attention to security. So imagine some weirdo in the next town over to you logs into your son or daughter's school session, and they're trying to pick up on little things like, does a student have a sibling, or maybe that they lost their pet that last week. So your son or daughter is playing in the front yard. The weirdo drives up and says, hey, Susie, I heard you lost Spot last week. Let's go over to the park where your brother Michael is, and we found your dog, and hop in my car and we'll go do that. To me, that's the worst of the worst of the worst. So not only are there financial issues, there are people protection issues. And it's not because of bad tooling. It's just because Zoom was not paying attention to their full security operations and looking for known threats in bad places like the dark web or bad guy land. So those are two major breaches in 2019 and 2020. Let's look at the big dog. Now, you've all probably heard of Capital One, I'm sure. They're a pretty cool company. They've got great marketing. They have their cafes. They've got Samuel L. Jackson on commercials asking what's in my wallet. And a lot of people use them. Now, of course, they have data centers, and I've been blessed to go to one of their data centers, and they are totally rad. They have defense in depth. They have best of breed. They have teams of people watching out for the security of their data centers. Now, not only is Capital One pretty cool on the marketing side, they're pretty technology forward. So they decided to go to AWS and use AWS storage because it's cheap and deep. For the most part, it's a lot easier to rent storage in, say, AWS than building out a data center with racks of spinning disk and flash and all that. What was Capital One storing in AWS? Credit card applications. Unfortunately, there are bad guys in the world who were looking for open S3 buckets in AWS. Now, these particular bad guys were writing scripts to go out and find open AWS buckets to do something called cryptojacking. Now, cryptojacking sounds kind of cool, but what it is using somebody else's compute and in order to mine cryptocurrency like Dogecoin, Bitcoin, Ethereum, or whatever. Mining for crypto is very expensive. It takes a lot of power. It generates a lot of heat. And if you can find somebody else's compute to do that, it's basically using somebody else's slave labor to mine for gold for you. So what happened, as these bad guys were writing these scripts and logging into Open S3 buckets, they found Capital One's Open S3 bucket. Like, somebody forgot to check the box that said private. It was open to the entire internet. What happened? The bad guys were able to exfiltrate 106 million credit card apps, which included 140,000 social security numbers and 80,000 bank account numbers. Because of this, Capital One was levied an $80 million fine. Again, that's a very large financial burden. But it also led to the loss of reputation, the loss of customers, and the loss of revenue. Matter of fact, next time Samuel L. Jackson asks what's in my wallet, I'm going to say there's quite a few things. But you know what's not in there? A Capital One credit card, because you people can't keep my data safe. So those are three of the major breaches in 2019 and 2020. And as you can see, in all three of them, it wasn't because of tooling. Juniper VPN, or Pulse Secure VPN, very good VPN, but it had a known vulnerability in that version, which somebody just forgot to patch. Zoom, because of their growth, they weren't focusing on security operations and looking for places where their data could be compromised. Capital One, somebody just forgot to check a box. And Capital One, like I said, they have defense in depth. They have best of breed, and they have teams of people watching out for security. But because of one simple mistake, They lost a lot of money and quite a few customers. Let's talk about the problem with cybersecurity right now. There are 3,000 vendors in the world selling tools to stop cybercrime. Last year alone, we spent $120 billion on those 3,000 vendors to buy their tools to stop cybercrime. However, even though we're spending all this money on all these tools, there were still nearly 4,000 reported breaches last year, which was up double from the year before. Cybersecurity does not have a tools problem. Cybersecurity has a tools effectiveness problem, and cybersecurity has an operations problem. So we've talked about some breaches. Let's talk about some of the things that you might be going through yourself. So on the left here, we have our before scenario, right? What are some of the things, some of the struggles that you might be going through? A lot of customers that talk to me are telling me that they're going through. First on deck, there just ain't enough hours in the day. How many hours are you spending a week on looking through alerts, combing through logs? Is it 5 hours? Is it 8 hours? If you're spending all this time digging through all of these alerts, trying to find that needle in the haystack, frankly, you're wasting time. Worse yet, if you're doing like a lot of customers I hear from, and those alerts are just kind of going into a file where nobody's really paying attention to until something goes bump in the night, you're missing threats that could potentially compromise your organization's data. Next in the before scenario, a lot of people are struggling with putting together a cohesive security strategy. Too often times something happens and we run out and we start evaluating different tools, we look at different things, and then we settle on a tool for that specific problem, and we start the implementation only to find out 6 months into it that it's going to take 2 to 3 full-time employees just to run that one tool, let alone the other 20 that you have in your organization. And then you get 6 months into it and realize, oh my gosh, I don't think that it's doing what I want, or it doesn't get fully implemented. And you just end up wasting time, or excuse me, wasting money on a tool that's not fully implemented. And next year you might have to replace with a tool that you think might be easier to operate. And then finally, in our before scenarios, don't really think I need to list this out, but breaches, right? It's not if you're going to get breached, it's when you're going to get breached. Gartner says that in the next year alone, 59% of organizations will be breached. What'll happen? Well, you could get fined, which is a problem. You could have a loss of reputation, which leads to a loss of revenue, or you could be hit with ransomware. What is your maximum tolerable downtime that you don't have access to your data and your assets before it's potentially crippling to your organization? Just ask Colonial Pipeline, right? They got hit with ransomware. They paid the $4.4 million and they got the decryptor, but the decryptor was so slow that they ended up having to go to their backups anyway. So they spent the money on the ransom and it was all for nothing. Now, thankfully, the FBI was able to hack back at DarkSide and get half of the money back, but still, $2.3 million is a lot of money to lose. So these are the before scenarios that I hear most often from customers, and these are real company impacting negative consequences that will happen if we continue to operate in the same way we have been for the past decades. However, I'm not here just to talk about the bad stuff. Let's talk about the good stuff too. What is your cybersecurity Garden of Eden? Let's look at the after scenario where you want to get to. I'd say, one of the things a lot of customers come to me and say is, I get all these alerts, I get all these events, and I'm just not sure what to focus on. If we can do alert priority, where you're only looking at 2 to 3 things that you really need to pay attention to, you'll be saving a lot of time. And as the old adage goes, time is money. So if you're saving time, you're saving money. And frankly, you're not getting bored combing through alerts looking for that needle in the haystack. Next, demonstrating security posture. Imagine the next time the mayor or the police chief or the city council comes to you and says, what is our risk posture? How are we going to fit this next compliance? Instead of having to run through and gather information from all your tools, if you had a report on the ready where you could demonstrate your security posture, it's going to be a lot easier for you to pass your audits, and you'll be saving time there. Now, I put new revenue streams in here, and for the commercial space, that's a big thing, because if you can meet compliance faster, you have access to new revenue streams. For most of the folks on the call here, it's more about protecting your funding. If you can demonstrate your security posture, if you can meet those compliance, you'll be able to protect your funding for the projects that you want to do. Next in our after scenario, tool optimization. We need to make sure that our tools are at the right patch level, that there isn't any glaring holes in our configurations, like some random port open on our firewall that's been there for 5 years and we don't know why. If you can optimize your tool set, put a good security strategy in, frankly, you're maximizing your spend, which is good for your organization. But equally as important, the next time you have a project that you need to go to get funding for, if the people that need to give you access to that funding know that you're using the money wisely, it's more likely that your project is going to go to the top of the list. So on the left, looks a little bit bleak, and these are just 3 of our before scenarios. There's probably 10 that we could talk about. On the right, it looks pretty good. It's getting closer to our cybersecurity Garden of Eden. Unfortunately, to get from our before scenarios and to realize those positive business outcomes outlined in green here, there's a rather large chasm. There's a delta between these two in order to get from before to after. We call those the required capabilities. What are some of the things that we need to take action on and we need to do in order to get to a good state? First, in our required capabilities, I'd say we need to see everything, right? We need to make sure that we're looking at our entire infrastructure. It doesn't matter if you subscribe to SIST or NAN, SANS or PCI or CGIS, any of the security frameworks, the first tenet in almost every single one of them is that you need to see everything running on your network and what operating systems are running on there. So see everything is probably the first place we need to start in our required capabilities. Secondly, in order to get from alert fatigue, which many of you are probably going through now, to prioritized alerts, we need to filter those down to make sure that we're weeding out the noise and highlighting the things that we really need to pay attention to that are potentially dangerous. Next in our required capabilities, not only should we sit there and wait for something to go bump in the night, we should take a proactive approach to make sure that we're looking for holes to plug before they start leaking. And then finally, we need access to security experts. We need people running our security operations that know security in and out, are paying attention to the feeds to make sure that we're securing our organization to the best we can. Let me tell you how Arctic Wolf does it. And by it, I mean the required capabilities. For the first required capabilities in See All, Arctic Wolf provides broad visibility. We'll take the logs from all of your security solutions. Through our sensors, we're collecting flow data at your egress points to make sure we're looking at all of the traffic that's going on. Through our agents, we're gathering telemetry from servers and endpoints to make sure we're looking at all that data. For your cloud environments, we're API connected, so we're getting all the information. So we're really getting a holistic view of your entire network that meets that See All required capability. Next, in filtered alerts, there's a lot of ways that we filter down, but one of the things we do is event correlation. So think about this. There's a failed login attempt on an account. No big deal. They weren't able to log in, so we're pretty safe. Somebody downloads a bunch of data. Well, our employees need to access our data, so they download it. Yeah, no problem. That's not a big deal. Successful login. That happens thousands of times a day. That's totally fine. Somebody attaches to OneDrive. Yes, we use OneDrive, so people should be attaching that. Alone, those aren't security concerns. Put those together. 3 failed login attempts on one account. Shortly thereafter, a successful login to that account. That account attaches to OneDrive and starts downloading 6 gigs of data. That is a security event. That is something we need to pay attention to. So when we're correlating the information, we get a better picture of what filters we need or what alerts we need to look at. And then under proactive, Arctic Wolf does threat hunting. When I talked about bad guy land on Zoom, Arctic Wolf scours the dark web looking for known username and passwords for you and your customers and your end users. We take a look at the entire attack surface. We look at the different tool sets. We look at the configuration, make sure they're correct. We make sure that the patch level is correct and warn you when there's specific CVEs on your environment. And then security experts for our final required capability there. It's what we do. Like, we're not server admins that, you know, have a side job doing security. We go to bed at night and we wake up in the morning thinking about cybersecurity. It's all we do. Go look at our tagline. Our tagline is End Cyber Risk. Now, you might be thinking, Jim, those required capabilities, if Arctic Wolf does what you say it'll do, meets my required capabilities. However, I've got, 10 people telling me that they can do the same thing. What makes Arctic Wolf special? I'll give you a couple instances on how Arctic Wolf does the required capabilities a little bit better. First, and I can't talk enough about these people, is the Concierge Security Team, or CST. Every Arctic Wolf account gets 2 named individuals that get to know your environment, get to know your people, get to know your processes, get to know your resources. When you call Arctic Wolf, you don't dial 1-800-ARCTIC Wolf, press 3 for the next operator and randomly get somebody that you have to walk through your environment. No, you call Bill or you call Mary, who are your named CST members who know your environment. So you're already starting ahead of the game. Next, the CST, we are 24/7 by 365. We don't sleep, we don't get sick, we don't go on vacation. Now, granted, every Arctic Wolf customer gets 2 named individuals, but those 2 named individuals are backed by hundreds of security analysts and engineers pouring through your data, correlating it, listening to threat feeds 24/7, so you don't have to be there at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Final thing about the CST, they are security ninjas. They are SANS certified. They are CISSP. Like I said, they're not server admins that do security on the side. That's all they do. We attract top talent because we are a security firm and security folks want to work at a security firm. We hire through a rigorous interview process, and we continue to invest in the people. If there's a new security certification that our people need, we fund that. We make sure they're at the top of their game. Next on our list of differentiators, Arctic Wolf doesn't require a tooling upgrade for you. You've picked the security solutions because you believe that they're right for your organization. You've tested them, you've gotten to know them, you can operate them. We don't think it's fair for us to come in and say, well, I'd really love to protect you, but you're going to have to buy a SIM, our SIM, and you're going to have to run a specific firewall and a specific endpoint tool. That's not fair. We want to make sure that we're working with everybody because we're heterogeneous. Finally, Arctic Wolf provides guidance in a consultative manner. Like I said, you have the CST that's there for any time something goes bump in the night. They send you tickets, like 2 a week with the who, what, when, where, why of something that happens. But also they provide detailed remediation steps for you to go and take action on right away to close that gap or stop the spread of a breach. Let's say you have a new compliance coming up. Call your CST. We'll help you build the report, or shoot, we'll build it for you so you can save time and do that. You want to know how we ran an issue to ground? Call your CST. We're happy to walk you through how we got to where we got. Hopefully, from some of this, you can see that Arctic Wolf is a great partner for you to get from your before scenario to your after scenario. I would like you to join Arctic Wolf in ending cyber risk. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, get with your Fulcrum representative. Get with me, jim.johnson@arcticwolf.com. I'd love to meet with you, or get one of my team members to meet with you to talk about your security journey, where you are today, and how we can help you get to that cybersecurity Garden of Eden. Happy to answer any questions. Hopefully I hit the time pretty well.
Yeah, I think it was great. I did have one question that came up over here, Jim.
Sure.
And I think it's in your wheelhouse. How do you and your team see ransomware affecting cloud infrastructure?
I see it actually growing, right? So cloud infrastructure, is just like every other infrastructure. There's holes in the security, and it's open to ransomware and being encrypted, where you're going to have to, pay a ransom or complete from backup, what have you. Matter of fact, we just sent out a notification to our customers about Mega, which is a cloud storage facilitator. And we're urging our customers to make some specific recommendations, because a lot of people in bad guy land are storing it in Mega as a service, storing that data. And they're trying to move laterally into additional cloud storage for either data mining or ransoming people. I'm happy to send out that that notification we sent to our customers after the presentation or after the call.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And if you could maybe throw your email address into the chat so people have it, in case any need to reach out to you. I know recently a lot of things we've heard is famous last words is, hey, we recently went to the cloud, so we're safe. I don't need to worry about it anymore.
Well, if you look at Capital One, ask them if they're safe, right? They probably are now, but they got beat up pretty bad to the tune of $80 million because they just forgot to check the box. Now, security experts are probably the hardest people to find right now, right? Out in the market, you can go and look at any job website. There is cybersecurity all over it. Number 2, cloud expertise. And if you're going to go to the cloud, you're going to need to have experts that know how to run it and can do it securely.
Yeah, so I think we want to open it up. If you guys have any questions, you can drop them into chat real quick. Jim, I do have one last question.
Yes, sir.
If you had to make one point, you only could make one point, what would it be? What would you tell these guys?
My one point is that, and I said it a couple times, I'll reiterate it. Cybersecurity does not have a tools problem. We all have tools that are good, but if we're not operating them correctly, we're putting ourselves at risk. That is the main thing. We need security operations.
I completely agree with you there. I haven't seen any new questions that are coming up. As Jeremy just said, if you guys wanted to unmute and jump in to the conversation, ask a question, feel free. Just be courteous. If there's somebody already asking a question, don't step on top of them.
Actually, I'd ask the group as well. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up. But what are the biggest risks that you're seeing out there, right? How can Fulcrum and Arctic Wolf help you meet some of the risks that you're seeing? Did the before scenarios that I talked about, is that stuff you're going through, or are there other things that you'd like to hear about? Lieutenant James Bomber, yes, I agree. That is pretty scary. And look, so here's the thing. They got hit because they made a mistake. Every bank is going to have an incident. It's how well are they going to protect you? What are they doing on the front end to try and save that stuff? And I said, I've seen their data centers. They are awesome. And they've got, all the blinking lights, teams of people, great tool sets. I've sold to them at previous companies. But they just happened to get breached, and it was easy for me to highlight. But you could almost go to any bank and find some breach information. Or hospital systems. The other one that I learned about, but I haven't had a chance to open up yet, was UHS hospital systems when they got hit. So they were hit with ransomware through business email compromise, and I'll probably add that to the next time I do this presentation. They got ransomed. They had to shut down 400 hospitals. They had to relocate patients. They had to divert ambulances to other hospitals, and it was really bad financially for them. But there were 4 deaths associated with the UHS breach. I mean, that's, look, cybercrime, you want to make your money, so be it. But I mean, we're talking about the loss of human life because of cybercrime, and that's just not acceptable to me.
Yeah, one thing I saw in here that's really interesting, and I completely agree with what James wrote, is getting the elected officials and the senior staff on board. Is there something that you guys do as far as education wise to get everybody? Because I know Fulcrum Group, we've talked to business leaders before, and we warn them and we warn them and we warn them, and then something happens and they act completely surprised. They had no idea this was coming on, and it was this big ordeal. And then we have some that they go through it, and then at the end of it, they still don't want to make a change. Do you guys have an approach when you're talking to mayors, you're talking to council members, people that are elected? Do you have an approach when you're talking to these guys to educate before something happens?
So I tried to hit some of the sound bites that like elected officials kind of listen to, right? So I like to quote things from Wall Street Journal or, some of the business magazines, because they actually have a lot of information on security, cybersecurity, and so forth. And if I say, pick a, security blogger, if I said Brian Krebs, well, he's actually a bad example because a lot of people know who he is. But if I said, somebody, Forrester, came out with this report that says cybersecurity is dangerous and we're in trouble, an elected official might not hear that, right? But if we have like documents from Wall Street Journal, rags that they read, it usually has a greater impact. The other thing that we're doing at Arctic Wolf is actually we're trying to massage some of our messaging to promote brand awareness. And the reason that is so more people understand what Arctic Wolf is doing, and that's self-serving for us. But it doesn't matter if they pick Arctic Wolf or another MDR or what have you, right? The more we're able to secure more people, more sets of data, the less and less attractive cybercrime is. So, I mean, I'm happy if anybody can set a meeting with some of those elected officials. I'd love to come in and talk to them, and I'll do my best to speak at a level that hits the points that they're looking for.
Yeah, I had another question too, is a lot of times what I hear is you say you're secure, but how do we know you're secure? And that goes with a lot of these people, because especially towns, they might have 20 vendors that they're working with. What's a good way for them to go back through and actually verify, just because you say you're secure, How do I actually know you're secure? What's the proof? What's a good way for them to do that?
Honestly, that's probably something that Fulcrum Group could probably do very well with your pen testing and security assessments, right? Get somebody that really knows security well to come in and do an assessment. The other thing we just announced this is our managed security awareness training for a relatively low price point. We're hitting where the attackers are attacking the most, which is the people. We need to make our people resilient. We need to make sure they understand the risks and how to protect themselves. Watch out for phishing emails. Make sure they're not plugging in that USB key that they found in the parking lot. And it's the way we deliver it is through our concierge security team. So you don't have to, as an administrator, watch, 10, 20, 30 hours of libraried content and then decide which one needs to be sent out. And we are creating content constantly. So we're not talking about the NIMDA virus or, anything like that. We're talking about, the Colonial breach or the UHS hospitals. We're talking about stuff that's happening right now. And they're 3-minute bite-sized chunks that drop into the end user's email on a biweekly cadence. So if we can educate our end users, that's a good thing. And frankly, as long as the mayor is one of our users or the city council or any of the elected officials you talked about, if they get that awareness, they'll start to understand the concern that everybody should be having about cybersecurity.
Yeah, and Danny brought up a good point. It wasn't too long ago. We actually had 23 different Texas municipalities that got hit during that ransomware attack. And that hit very close to home.
Yeah. My eyes aren't good enough to read that, but I bet it's funny.
Anybody else got any questions they wanted to bring up? So we're coming up just about on 1 o'clock here, and if you guys are anything like me, I realize you're going to leave this meeting and immediately think of something. Oh, I should have asked that question. If that happens, please reach out to us. We are happy to follow up with you. Myself or Jim, we would love to follow up and have a one-on-one conversation with you guys. Doesn't have to be a sales pitch. You guys just have questions you want to get answered. Reach out to us. That's what we're here for. Anything other than that, I think my team here is probably going to be following up with you guys. And so if there's any opportunities or anything you think of, please, 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 please reach out to us and let us know. I think that's about it. Jeremy, do you want to wrap us up, send us out here?
Well, you basically said exactly what I was thinking. I mean, everyone feel free to jump at this time. We're going to, as Fulcrum and Jim, we're going to stay on for a little bit after in case there is any other questions. But we really appreciate you guys joining, and we will keep you guys in mind next time we put one of these together. And have a wonderful, successful day.
Thanks, everybody.